Today's lesson is the Canterville Ghost. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today it's our literature unit for the month of October. And Helen will be back in a little while. We have Mike with us today. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks very much, Roger. Good to be here.
In our unit on literature, it's a story called The Canterville Ghost. It's an old story. I believe it's from 1887, if I'm not mistaken. And it was written by the Irish writer Oscar Wilde.
Oh, a great writer of short stories and novels and plays, too. A very talented guy. And it's a good time to be reading a ghost story if the title is any indication, because, of course, we are in the month of October.
Ooh.
And Halloween's coming up. We're a few weeks early here, but I think it's about time to scare ourselves a little bit and get into the mood of the season, get into that scary October Halloween mood with our story about the Canterville Ghost. It's not a story I'm familiar with, so I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, of course, Oscar Wilde wrote lots of stuff, and this is a short story that we're going to share with you today, but we're not going to actually read the story itself. We're going to read a summary of the story. So let's dig right into this and find out what the story is all about. We'll listen to the first part now one time.
The Canterville Ghost.
When the American minister to Britain, Mr. Otis, first laid eyes on the castle called Canterville Chase, it seemed to him the picture of charming English country living. He wasn't at all bothered by the stories from local residents about how the place had been haunted for centuries. After purchasing it, he and his family settled in with the belief that they wouldn't actually see anything supernatural.
大家好，第一部分我们看到单字 haunt。这个字是动词，指鬼魂常出没或是使不断困扰。例如 The ghost of a headless man was said to haunt the old castle. 据说那座古老城堡有一个无头男子的鬼魂出没。或是 Memories of the quake haunted Jeff for most of his life. Jeff 的大半生都被那场地震的记忆所困扰。另外这个字加上字尾 ing 就成了形容词 haunting， 指萦绕的或是使人难忘的。举例来说 The singer was famous for her haunting vocal style. 那名歌手因她令人难忘的唱腔而出名。接着我们看到形容词 supernatural， 指超自然的或是与鬼神有关的。例如 When people give me supernatural explanations for things, I rarely believe them. 当有人解释超自然的事物给我听时，我鲜少相信他们。另外补充一个相关形容词 mystical， mystical， mystical，指神秘的或是不可思议的，像是 Ancient civilizations believed mystical forces shaped their daily lives. 古文明相信神秘力量建立了他们的生活。
Okay, it's time for us to discuss the contents of the first part of our lesson, and it begins by saying, when the American minister to Britain, Mr. Otis, first laid eyes on the castle called Canterville Chase, it seemed to him the picture of charming English country living. This happens to a lot of Americans, or Canadians, I suppose, as well, when they go to England and they see these great castles there. They see the old cobblestone roads and stuff like that. They just fall in love with the place, and this is an American minister here, and he just fell in love with Canterville Chase, which, of course, is kind of like a castle in the English countryside. And I guess he's some kind of American government official because he is a minister to Britain. I suppose that means he's an ambassador or a diplomat.
So there he is, an American in Britain. He's traveling around. Maybe he got an invitation to a place, this Canterville Chase Castle, and it seemed to him the picture of charming English country living. We're not talking about a painting, a photograph, that kind of picture. When we say something is the picture of another thing, we're basically saying it's the perfect example. If you were imagining a picture of this type of thing, this is what you would imagine, all right? So it was a perfect example, the kind of thing he would think of seeing in a book. When someone described charming English country living, you would see a castle that looked just like Canterville Chase. Now, it says he wasn't at all bothered by the stories from local residents about how the place had been haunted for centuries. Ooh, like many old places in certain parts of the world, there are stories about these places, maybe even some scary stories. But these stories didn't bother him. He wasn't frightened or scared away or bothered or annoyed or anything by the stories the local residents told him about Canterville Chase. A resident is a person who lives in a place. If that is the city that you live in, that is, you are a resident of the city. If that is the house, the apartment, the home that you live in, you are a resident of that home. You're not a visitor. You're not staying for just a short time, traveling on your way to another place. No, that is your home. You are a resident of that place. So the residents were saying, oh, Canterville Chase, yes, it's a beautiful country house or a beautiful castle, but it's been haunted for centuries, hundreds of years.
Right, so if something's haunted, that means there is a ghost there and it bothers living people. I remember many years ago there was a building at the corner of Jilonglu and Sinilu here in Taipei.
Yeah.
And it just stood there for years and years, and I wondered, why don't they tear that down and build something bigger? Well, they can't do that because it's haunted. A lot of people told me that. Eventually, of course, it was torn down and there's a tall building there now. But indeed, this country castle there in England, Canterville Chase, was rumored to be haunted by the local residents. And I suppose because this guy was from some other place, he was American, and he thought, well, that doesn't really have anything to do with me. You guys here are too superstitious. There's no such thing as ghosts. I'm not afraid. I'm going to move into that place. I'm going to buy it. And it probably sold for a pretty reasonable price because it was haunted. So after purchasing it, he and his family settled in with the belief that they wouldn't actually see anything supernatural. And I suppose a ghost could be described as something supernatural. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now and continue summarizing our featured story, The Canterville Ghost. Let's listen.
The ghost of Sir Simon de Canterville, who had brutally murdered his wife before being locked away in a room to starve to death, was determined to challenge that belief. He immediately began trying to terrify the Otis family with his ghostly presence, just as he had done to generations before them. Among his favorite activities were rattling chains and leaving bloody stains on the floor.
第二部分我们看到单字 brutally， 这个字是副词，指残忍的或是残酷无情的。举例来说 Walter was brutally attacked by a pack of wild dogs. Walter 受到一群野狗残忍的攻击。或是 A woman was arrested for brutally mistreating her domestic worker. 一名女士因残酷对待家佣而被逮捕。另外这个字去掉字尾 ly 就成了形容词 brutal， 指残暴的或是野蛮的。我们可以说Everyone in town was happy when the brutal man was put in jail. 当那个粗暴的男人被关进监狱时，镇上每个人都很高兴。再来我们看到动词 rattle， 指使发出碰撞声或是嘎嘎声。例如 The explosion rattled the windows in the building. 爆炸威力让那栋大楼的窗户震得咯咯作响。另外除了上面的意思，这个字还可以指使紧张或是使恐惧。我们可以说The plane's hard landing rattled Janine's nerves. 飞机重落地，害 Janine 绷紧神经。再补充一个相关片语 rattle off， 表示轻易说出，像是 Manny rattled off his favorite baseball players. Manny 顺口就说出他最喜欢的篮球球员。
Okay, so the story continues here. The ghost of Sir Simon de Canterville, who had brutally murdered his wife before being locked away in a room to starve to death, was determined to challenge that belief. So already here in the second part, we discover that the ghost is actually real. It's the ghost of Sir Simon de Canterville. He brutally murdered his wife. You can murder someone by giving them sleeping pills or something like that. But if you use violence and if there's blood and screaming and pain and stuff like that, then we say you have brutally murdered someone.
That's a terrible story. Sir Simon de Canterville was a bad guy. So he murdered his wife brutally, and apparently he was caught for it. He didn't get away. He was caught, put on trial or something, but he was punished by being locked away in a room to starve. So this is what they did hundreds of years ago. So this could have been in the 1400s or something like that. He did this terrible thing. He was caught, and the local lord or whoever said, your punishment should be you will be locked away. So basically, they locked him in a room to starve to death. This is something that they used to do back in the old days. They might lock you in the room and then build a wall over the door so that you couldn't escape or something like that. So he died there, but of course, someone dies in a terrible way. They often might leave behind a ghost. Well, at least in the stories they do. And so in our story, it's interesting because Sir Simon de Canterville, his ghost, seems to be kind of a character in the story. We can almost imagine him watching this American family move into the house. They're laughing, oh, it's haunted, ha ha ha. It's all kind of a joke to them, but he's determined to challenge their belief that it's not haunted. He's going to show them how haunted it is. It says he immediately began trying to terrify the Otis family with his ghostly presence, just as he had done to generations before them.
Exactly. So he wanted to teach them a lesson. You think that there's no ghost here? Ha! I'm going to show you that there actually is a ghost here. So right away, he tried to terrify the Otis family. If you terrify somebody, you try to really, really scare them, okay? And of course, something that does scare you can be described as terrifying. And related to that is the word terrorist, which refers to people who try to bomb embassies or cars or things like that in order to get other people to do something. So that's a terrorist. They use terrifying means to achieve their ends. And here the ghost wanted to terrify the Otis family. He was probably going to make boo noises and rattle chains and stuff like that.
That's exactly what he did, among other things. It says among his favorite activities were rattling chains and leaving bloody stains on the floor. Ooh, that's another classic one. When you're trying to scare people, when you're a ghost and you're doing your job and haunting a place, rattling chains, making boo or ooh sounds late at night. Those are classics. But also leave some bloody stains on the floor. That's a really good tip to all the ghosts out there. If you want to scare people really well, bloody stains are a winner. But rattling chains is a classic. When you rattle something, you take something that's kind of noisy and you hit it against something else that's kind of noisy. If you think of putting a rock in the bottom of a tin can and then shaking the tin can so the rock bounces around inside, both the rock and the can will make noise. When they hit each other, they make a louder noise, that kind of thing. So when you think of metal banging against metal, that might be a rattling sound, like shaking some chains.
Yeah, I think I remember going to temples many years ago, and there would be people in there rattling these wooden sticks inside a bamboo container or something.
Right.
You rattle them, you kind of mix them, and then you reach in and you pull one out, and I guess it tells you your fortune or something like that. So yes, this is something that's sure to scare anybody, like the Otis family here. They were scared perhaps by the rattling chains, and I would be scared if I saw some blood stains on the floor. Bloody stains or blood stains, basically the same thing. Blood on the floor, and then it kind of dries and turns a dark color. That can be quite scary. Ooh, did somebody get killed here or something? That is really spooky. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the third part and continue to summarize our featured story, The Canterville Ghost.
Unlike previous inhabitants, however, the Otises didn't think much of Sir Simon's behavior. They cleaned up the stains and casually brushed off the ghost's direct attempts at scaring them, even going so far as to offer him oil for his noisy chains. This failure to achieve the one thing he had been good at made Sir Simon quite depressed.
最后第三部分，我们看到片语 brush off， 表示对点点点置之不理或是不理睬点点点。我们可以说 Gary says he will help me move, but he keeps brushing me off when I call. Gary 说他要帮我搬家，但每次我打电话给他，他总是忽视我。或是 Alexis brushes off the criticism about her photography and doesn't let it get to her. Alexis 不理会对他摄影的批评，不让他影响自己。
Okay, it's time now for us to discuss the third and final paragraph. And it goes on to say, unlike previous inhabitants, however, the Otises didn't think much of Sir Simon's behavior. So unlike here means they weren't like the previous inhabitants, which means the people who lived there before were probably very scared by these things. They were terrified by the rattling chains and by the bloody stains on the floor. But the Otises, they weren't scared by such things. Maybe they had some experience of living in haunted houses before. So, yeah, they didn't think much of his behavior. What's going on there? That guy's rattling chains again. Hey, can you be quiet? We're trying to read here.
Interesting. This would be maybe like a foreigner coming to Taiwan and someone would say, oh, you're not going to stay on the 4th floor of that hotel in room number 44, are you?
Ooh.
And they might go, why wouldn't I? It's just a number. And they don't understand that they should be scared. This is a superstition for the local people. But if you're new to that place, you're like, well, it doesn't bother me. So the Americans, in this case, living at this castle, weren't bothered by this ghost. They were actually treating it like it was just another thing to do around the house. It says they cleaned up the stains and casually brushed off the ghost's direct attempts at scaring them, even going so far as to offer him oil for his noisy chains. Okay, this is getting actually a little bit funny. So they wake up and there's random blood stains around the house on the floor. They just, get out a mop and a bucket and some water and they clean them up and then they brush off the ghost's attempts to scare them. When you brush off something, you kind of ignore it. You know it's there, but you don't want to pay it attention. It's not that important, or maybe you want to show, this doesn't bother me. I'm just going to brush it off as if it's like a piece of dust on the sleeve of your shirt. You just sort of go, doesn't bother me at all. And they even went so far, or to go so far as to offer him oil for his noisy chains. Well, you're rattling those chains. Do you need some oil for them? This is how far they went. This is kind of surprising to us that not only would they clean up the bloodstains, which would maybe bother some people, but they went even further than that. They did even more than that. They offered the ghost oil for his chains.
That's a pretty healthy attitude, perhaps, to not be scared of the supernatural.
That's right, and frustrating for the ghost. You're supposed to be scared.
Right, but maybe ghosts are misunderstood or something like that. I don't know. I don't want to mess with ghosts at all. They are terrifying, even though I've never seen a ghost myself before. But they're probably something not to fool around with. So this is kind of an interesting approach here. They kind of took it in stride here. You've got those noisy chains, Maybe they bother you as much as they bother us. So here's some WD-40 or something. Here's some oil here. Just kind of put a few drops between each link of the chain, and it won't be so noisy after that.
Exactly. And this failure to achieve the one thing he had been good at made Sir Simon quite depressed. So yes, this ghost was frustrated. He was failing to do the one thing he is good at. The one thing he was good at was scaring people. He'd been doing it for centuries. No one came near the house. He was like, I'm a successful ghost. I'm doing my job of haunting this place and scaring all the local residents. Well, now he's not. He's failing at that. So he became quite depressed. Yeah, after you try to do something many, many, many times and you always fail, well, that might lead to you feeling depressed. This is the adjective form, I should say, of the word depression. When you feel blue, when you feel sad, when you feel like you're a failure, when you feel like everything you do just doesn't work work out. It can lead to this sadness, this feeling of like, every day I get up and every day just gets worse than the one before. I'm really depressed. I'm sad. I'm blue. I feel really down. We have a sad ghost on our hand here, Roger.
We do. He's quite depressed, and you might be depressed, for example, if you lost your job and if your girlfriend ran away from you.
Oh, no.
And if your parents kicked you out of your house.
No.
And the doctor told you only had 6 months to live. Yeah, I would be very depressed if I heard things like that. But that's different from suffering from depression, which is actually a clinical condition. But again, most of us feel depressed from time to time. We all fail a test, or we all lose the girl at some point. And in this particular case, we fail to scare people if we're a ghost. What is the ghost going to do about that? We'll find out next time. But before we say goodbye today, we need to hear from our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分提到 Mr. Otis 想买的那一座城堡 Canterville Chase， 其实在当地的居民就有流传一个说法，说那个地方闹鬼好几个世纪了。文中有一个单字 resident， 就是表达居民、居住者。那它是来自动词 reside R-E-S-I-D-E。 那我们来学习它的字首字根。好，看到 S-I-D 或是 S-I-D-E 这一类的字根，它具有 sit 坐或者是就坐的那种意思。那它们还带有保持在某种状态的含义。好，在 reside 这个字当中，它的字首 re 表示以前再度，那么字根 side 表示做。如果某人或某事物从以前就一直待在那个地方，存在于那个地方，我们用这样的方式也许可以联想到 reside 它就有居住定居或者是存在于什么什么的那种意思。好，另外补充一下 dissident 这个字，它是拼作 D-I-S-S-I-D-E-N-T。 好，这个字它的字首 D-I-S 表示分开，那么字根 S-I-D 表示做， E-N-T 是形容词字尾。同学们可以试着联想政治理念不同的人通常不会坐在一起商讨事情，那么 dissident 当形容词就可以用来表达是持有不同政见的，那么当名词可以用来表达持有不同政见的人，异议分子。好，那么接着读到课文第二部分的最后一句 Among his favorite activities were rattling chains and leaving bloody stains on the floor。 这个句子里面我们看到 among his favorite activities 它是主词补语，那么 were 是动词， rattling chains and leaving bloody stains on the floor 则是主词所以它的句子结构其实是主词补语加 be 动词加主词，而这样的用法就是把主词补语提前的倒装句。我们来学习一下，当主词比较长或者是带有修饰语的时候，可以把主词补语移到句首，那这个时候主词和动词要倒装。我们用句型来看，也就是说，假设原本直述句的基本句型是主词加 be 动词加主词补语，那这时候呢，我们把主词补语，也许它是现在分词过去分词、形容词或是介系词、片语等等，我们把它移到句首，然后再经过倒装之后呢，句型会变成主词补语加 be 动词加主词。同学们有没有注意到，其实我们就是把主词和主词补语对调就可以了举例来说 A woman wearing a red dress is standing over there。 一名身穿红色洋装的女子站在那里。我们把主词补语 standing over there 移到句首，然后经过倒装，这个句子就会说成 Standing over there is a woman wearing a red dress。 好，那么回头来看课文句子，它原本可以写成 Rattling chains and leaving bloody stains on the floor were among his favorite activities。 那因为主词比较长嘛，这样句子好像会显得头重脚轻，所以把主词补语移到句首会比较理想，然后就变成课文里的句子咯。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Minister My grandfather served as New Zealand's first minister to Japan. Resident. The residents of this neighborhood are friendly and welcoming. Brutally. The criminal has been arrested for brutally attacking an old man. Terrify. The thought of accidentally stepping on a snake while hiking terrifies her. Rattle. Stephen rattled the jar of coins before placing it back on the shelf. Stain. Greg dropped his coffee and created a large stain on the living room carpet. Depressed. Fiona doesn't know what to do with her life, and her situation is making her depressed. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.